Midnight Cowboy, directed by John Schlesinger, is a great example of a film where the actors have quite extreme characterization. It's very high level acting, particularly Dustin Hoffman, John Voight as well, though we'll be talking a bit more about Hoffman. Um, his character, Ratso Rizzo, is a very extreme character. He's a guy in New York City with a very strong accent, very nasal. He has had some kind of injury or disease which makes him limp in a very distinctive way. And he's thin, and he's starving a lot of the time. And he's also a thief and a lowlife and a con man and very aggressive, but also quite vulnerable. It's really an extreme character. And how does an actor accomplish this to the degree that Hoffman did, which is really great, and is quite organic, meaning that it's experienced, it's completely believable. This is what a lot of actors who really love the art of acting that they strive for, to get a role like this and to really thoroughly embody it. And he manages to do so, and at times be even quite funny, though the character's not intending to be funny. Voight does almost as much of transformation. His character is a male stud, hustler, he calls it.
For money for what? Oh, hell, I'm a hustler. You didn't know that? How am I supposed to know that? I mean, you gotta tell a person these things. I'm a hustler.
From Texas, who pretends to be a cowboy, comes to New York City in order to hustle women into having sex with them for money. And he's really dumb, but he's quite enthusiastic at the same time, and is quite surprising a lot of the time. It's really his story. Ratso Rizzo is actually the supporting character, though he kind of takes over the movie in a lot of ways, because he's the movie really becomes about the relationship between these two men. And they're both extreme characters. In Hoffman's case, with all the qualities this character has, how did he come to that? Well, obviously, we don't know. We're not Dustin Hoffman, and we're not his director or the other actors. At least I'm not. And so nobody knows for sure, of course, except the people involved. But we can make some general principles and some guesses, or to say how in general should an actor approach a role like that. And of course, there are many techniques, good techniques of acting around the world, but they often have some things in common. So, you have a guy, a character, Ratso, who limps in an extreme way. Now, if you go to amateur theater or community theater, you always see some actor limping who's adopted a limp. It's usually totally unbelievable. It's a cliche. In fact, what's fun in amateur theater is to see when they do the big scene with 12 actors on stage, they all have a distinctive walk. That's, complete bullshit. But they're having fun doing it, and I always find it very funny to watch that. So it's not just that you come up with some limp that you do and that you practice a little bit and then you put it in the role, because probably that limp is not real. So what is a a better actor than that, somebody who's at least approaching a professional level, do. For this, I'm going to turn to British acting. They're great. Their training, physically particularly, is pretty excellent at having the actor observe and imitate. So, playing whatever character, whether it's a laborer, a bartender, a lord, a lady, a serving wench, a king, a pauper on the street, a thief, they they are trained to go and observe uh, people like this. To a certain extent, and commonly, you'll for the first 10 minutes, I'll be pretty impressed with the acting. They all seem to be, exactly the characters and the social level and the physical movements and so forth and the speech that their character that is warranted by their character's level in society, etc. And then after 10 or 15 minutes, I start getting bored. And it's because I realize most of the actors are not organic. They're not living a life. They're not experiencing. They're merely executing all of these pretty well observed physical characteristics and sometimes vocal characteristics. And that's not enough. That can be impressive, but it's not enough. Now, don't get me wrong. There's some truly excellent British actors, uh, both in the last generation and this generation. The last generation, they had extraordinary actors: Richard Burton and Peter O'Toole and Richard Harris and Alan Bates and Maggie Smith, Susanna York, Glenda Jackson, just a lot, a lot, a lot. In this generation, of course, Daniel Day-Lewis, who's kind of works in a parallel method way, as everybody knows, and Gary Oldman and Tim Roth and people like that. So they're I don't mean to put down the British. They can be really terrific actors. What it seems as though is the really excellent ones are have some Stanislavski or film directors have whipped them into shape because they don't get too much of that from stage directors in England. Or they're just natural geniuses, like, say, Peter O'Toole was. And so they instill life into these creations they make by observation and imitation. And they come up with some characteristics of their own that are not even in what they observe, but what they intuit in the character. This is fairly universal. You'll find this in France, you'll find it in many other countries, that the very best of their actors just have this intuitive sense. However, as the great Laurence Olivier observed, when they asked him who's better, you or Brando, that was the big question back then. In the English-speaking world, who was the greatest actor, Brando or Olivier? And Brando, of course, was the method actor studio paragon, and Olivier was in ways, the classical British paragon. And Olivier said, Brando's better than me. And they said, oh, you're just being modest. And he said, no, it's not modesty. I'll tell you, on any given day or evening, I can be as good or better than Brando. It's not that. It's that he's a lot more consistent than I am. And films where, yes, he's impressive, but you don't quite believe him. And films where he's absolutely glorious. We obviously can't see him on stage. He's been dead for quite a while. But we can read observations from other, people who saw him on stage, who were theater people, who would talk about his performances, and it was pretty much the same. And Brando was a lot more consistent. And why? Because the actor's studio technique, method technique, whatever you want to call it, allows the actor to be inspired nearly every time they work. Whereas somebody like Olivier is depending on the muses, the gods, to inspire them, like in the old-fashioned sense of artists used to say that all the time. I have to be inspired. Well, part of what Stanislavski and Strasberg and so forth were all about was to say, how can we be inspired every time, or let's be realistic, nearly every time I work? That's what the whole thing's really about. Because there have always been great actors in every culture. It's not that the method has a lock on great acting. It's that we have more of a lock on great acting more consistently because we have a technique that allows us to be inspired, that allows us to be organic, not just by inspiration. Well, it is inspiration, but it's allowing the inspiration every time. And that's, by the way, why we emphasize breathing so much, because the word inspire means to breathe in. The Greeks knew this. It comes from the Greek root spira, to breathe. So, getting back to an actor like Hoffman, and I'm saying probably, I wasn't there, but probably he did go out and he observed some New York real extreme characters that seemed to suit what was in the script with this Ratso Rizzo. You know, he went out to the Bronx or to Brooklyn and find somebody with a strong accent. Ratso's Italian American, so he probably went to those neighborhoods and found one or more people who he thought, oh, that guy's, the way he limps is, my God, that's a great limp. It's very believable, but it's very unique. And not only that, he gets places. He manages to get places, even though the limp is very noticeable. And it's not just limp number 7A from the community theater. It's a real kind of extraordinary and complicated limp that comes from a real disease or injury. So, and he probably, again, we don't know for sure, but he probably followed this guy, or a few of them, around a lot and practiced it till he could get it, till it was like perfect and second nature, and he could go all day like that. And then probably also he consulted somebody, possibly a doctor or something like that, who understood what would cause this sort of a limp. Was it a bone fracture, a bad bone fracture? Was it a disease? Was it polio? What was it? And probably got some information on this. And that makes it much better, because not only is your imitation become better because you feel it more. You feel what it feels like when you've been going too long in the day and it starts to hurt. Where does it hurt? Why does it hurt? When does it feel better? All of this sort of thing. But also then you have the traumatic incident of whether it was the disease or the injury, to actually have more of a real imagined I use the term imagined experience for experiencing something in the character's past, but experiencing it in a moment-to-moment way. That's not a mental idea, but rather an experiential idea. You actually do it so that you have a memory to draw on, a sense memory and a narrative memory of what happened to you and how it felt and what you did and how other people reacted and all of this. Because then that becomes important. If you then, once you master this limp and the reasons for it and a bit of the history of it all, you start actually walking around like that in the city, then you start feeling people's reactions, how they treat somebody who has a disability like that. And particularly if they're a kid, how the other kids treat you. But even as an adult, you'll start to see how many people are nasty, really nasty, just on the street, who make fun of you, insult you, laugh at you, want to get away from you, want to be over sympathetic with you and do anything for you, but not be real with you. It's it's surprising, actually. Not everybody, but an awful lot of people. And so, what does that do to you? I mean, if you experience that, even just for a few days, probably you're going to get a bit nasty yourself. You're going to get angry. You're going to get offended. You're going to get insulted. You're going to feel humiliated. Humiliated. You're going to feel like, okay, if you're fairly young, young people are really concerned with how the opposite sex, or maybe the same sex, other people that you would like to be lovers with possibly, react to you. Do they think you're attractive? Do they think this or that? Well, in the case of somebody with that kind of disability, very few people are going to be attracted to them. You may be attracted to them. They're not going to be attracted to you. What? What? You don't know. You have to experience that. What's that like? And how lonely does that make you feel? And how much more angry does that make you feel that people either ignore you or they just are repelled by you? This is quite important because in the development of the character, because it does influence your reactions to things, to people, to situations. And we find out that Ratso Rizzo's father was a shoeshine man who spent his life hunched over, shining the shoes of more affluent men, at the bottom of Grand Central Station or something like that. And that's a physically abusive job, actually, to the body. And Rizzo says at a certain point, by the time he was middle-aged, he was stooped over. His spine, his back curved. And there was no way he wanted to grow up and be that. But being a person with disabilities, he didn't have much choice in life. And it wasn't, this was well before Congress passed the American with Disabilities Act. So there was almost no government support for somebody with disabilities. And he had to do something to make a living. And of course, people wouldn't hire him except for the most menial tasks, which would be abusive to his body. And he has so much anger with him and in him, as you could have experienced, and so much disdain and humiliation that it's almost nothing for him to become a thief and a con man and a criminal, a petty criminal, small criminal, but in all sorts of different ways. So now Hoffman has a chance to practice the behavior of a petty criminal. And you see it all through the film. He went in one of these phone booths, and there's where the change comes out at the bottom, and he would check this every single time he's in a phone booth, or even passing a phone booth, like second nature. He could be talking to Joe Buck, John Voight's character. He could be concerned about something else, but his hands always find that change slot in the phone, unconscious, subconsciously. He just does it. He sticks his hands in the pockets to see if there's something he can steal. He does it without thinking. It's just automatic with him. So this is something that in working on the character, he'd practice until it was a physically normal for him. And part of the muscle memory, and that's important, of the character. So muscle memory, you have it in your own life. I mean, think about every time you brush your teeth and you're thinking about something else. Your hands, your right and left hand are already coordinated to do all the tasks without you thinking about it. They just do it. We use muscle memory most of the day. Well, you have to develop that in your character. And if they're an extreme character, a complicated character, like Rizzo, you have to practice that a lot until it's muscle memory, until it's second nature. And of course, he does that brilliantly. And along with all that a lot of that comes out of emotional states, the discovery of who this guy is. But then it brings on emotional states, the reaction to different situations, the need to survive. And that the harder it is to survive, the more rules you're going to break. Until the point, do you even have a philosophy about what's good or evil? Do you? Does it matter to you? Do you make justifications? Or did you make justifications for a while, for a few years, and then after a while it doesn't even matter anymore whether you justify your actions? Also, how do you fight? Because if you're going to be a petty thief, a petty criminal, and you have this disability, and you're impoverished, and you're hungry, if you don't, you're going to need to defend yourself. Physically, you're going to have to defend yourself because people will abuse you. People will try to kick you around and humiliate you and insult you and treat you very badly. Sometimes for good reason, because you're doing some criminal shit, but nevertheless, you're going to have to defend yourself, and even sometimes get aggressive with other people to initiate it. So obviously, if you have that kind of disability and you're small and hungry and all that, you're not going to be the greatest fighter in the world. I mean, you're not stepping any boxing rings. You're not a black belt in a martial art. You're just a person who's fighting for their physical existence all the time. So what? Do you get a knife? Do you even get a gun? Do you have certain? No, you're not a black belt, but maybe you have certain moves you can do, especially something that the other person doesn't expect, like to be kicked. You know, in some cultures like France, kicking is part of their fighting style. In America, it used to be anyway. We would grow up and say, real men don't kick, they hit. Kicking is for girls was the whole thing when I was growing up. So we really didn't learn to kick very well in fights. And maybe part of that is we didn't play European football. We played American football, where the only time you kick is just a few times, even though it's called football. No, we're basically more an upper torso culture for men, anyway. So would you think of kicking somebody, and particularly in that period of time in the late 60s, early 70s, men were still not, it's not the first thing they do in a fight is kick, most men. So if you develop that maybe the thing is with your good foot to kick, okay, that could be some line of defense for you, because you could surprise the other person and maybe get away or hit them with something or whatever. So there's that, although that doesn't really come up in the film of him having to physically defend himself, but it comes close. He is aggressive, though, when the taxi almost hits him, and it's a famous little scene where he's kind of almost hit by a taxi, And he slams the hood of the taxi and yells, "I'm walking here, I'm walking here," to the cab driver, who yells "fuck you" back at him or something. It's like he's actually quite aggressive with people, and he'll insult them, he'll curse at them, he'll make as though he's going to attack them, even though he doesn't, because it's part of his defense system. And he is really truly angry a lot of the time.